Hello, everyone. Well, I hope you are all in anticipation of one of the greatest of holidays that we have in America, which is the 4th of July. The 4th of July happens to be my favorite holiday because it really is signifies a rupture, a breaking point of the spirit of independence. So I'm always very happy to celebrate the spirit of independence. But first of all, I want to thank every single person who has subscribed to the channel in the past several days. I had no idea because when I do my little evening chats, when I get to them, I had no idea that the message would resonate in my previous video on the nature of work and how you should avoid certain types of jobs and a certain attitude that people have these days. So I had no idea. I am pleased though, because that means that we are really changing minds, we're changing mentalities. And so, however, there was a question that several people asked, and it is a good question. It is a relevant question, which, of course, in my little chat, I didn't really get into it as much because I was giving you the broader principles. But a lot of you asked me, they said, well, that's all well and good, but how am I going to make a living? What am I going to do to survive, basically, right? So that is was the purpose of this video for today. But you really, let me repeat what I said in the previous video. You do not need a job. That's what I literally said. What you need is a plan. You need a life that is worth living. So I want to continue, if you'll allow me, gentlemen, to extend a continuation of my earlier remarks in the video because apparently they struck a nerve. And they were, I realized I had no idea. One of my assistants told me, they said, it's being shared, circulated. It's been received with a fervor. And I really didn't expect it. But perhaps I should have, because it does affect, jobs do affect millions and millions of people in this country and around the world. So it seems that the message was more than a provocation. It was, to many of you, a long awaited exhale. You were released from the tyranny of expectation. Expectation is the tyranny that characterizes our postmodern age. It is the source of why so many people, young and old alike, are so unhappy and depressed, especially in the Western world. But I gave you a nod of permission that was long withheld from you to dream of something higher than some random paycheck and a microwave meal. You know, of course, the question arises, and I understand. Well, if I don't get a job, then what? What, sir, is a man to do if he is not to report each morning like some trained hound to a fluorescent kennel and without the cuteness? And it's not an idle question. It is fair. It is a fair question. It is not enough to tell a man to reject uh, the strictures that we are under. We also have to provide you with the tools that you need to survive the siege. I told you long ago that on this channel, I don't only give you principles, I actually give you solutions, right? That is one of the reasons why we are a math channel. We do offer practical solutions to problems. So if you will allow me to offer you what I think is a good plan, no, it's not a get rich scheme. That's a scam, by the way. It's not a utopian fantasy, but really it is a blueprint that you need to become not necessarily rich, but independent. Independence, not wealth, is the true source of freedom. And you can secure, you need a program by which you can secure the basic necessities that we all need, uh, and your self-respect without necessarily having to surrender your soul to the modern day corporate machinery. So we have to speak clearly, but also maintaining our noble spirit. Uh, so first of all, we have to reclaim the nature of work, right? We have to reclaim the definition of what it means. We have to redefine once again what it truly means to work. And really, it is a tragedy that the term, when you think of work today, it now evokes cubicles of some kind, or Zoom calls, or quarterly reviews, or the feigned smile of the sycophant. Um, I've seen some of those work meetings. It's horrible. You're surrounded by people you don't really like anyway. Uh, Many of it's just, well, I won't get into it because people will start saying that I'm being mean and whatever. But I think you all get the point. Um, but work in its true form is really a sacred act, because if you labor honestly by your own will and according to your own rhythm, then it's really as noble as prayer. The farmer who tills his field at dawn is working. The writer, some of you are writers who, when you sharpen your prose into a blade of sorts, you are working. The baker, when you knead dough by in the early morning, or the tutor, when you guide a student through Euclid, all of us are men who are working. But we do not grovel. We do not clock in to be watched like infants. Our work is an offering. It is a vocation, they used to be called. It's not an obligation to some random corporation. So we have to dispatch the vulgar misapprehension that work is some monotonous groveling of button clerks and screen staring all day in some fluorescent lit office. In the sanctified work, in its sanctified and original sense, is the wielding of one's faculties to produce something worthy. Look at the great Paul. I mentioned uh, Isaac Newton before, but I'm going to mention even more mathematicians. The vast majority of even modern day mathematicians, especially if you look at the 20th century, many of them never worked. And when I say never worked, of course, I am referring to what I said in my previous video. I'm talking about the typical 9 to 5, 8 to 5. I don't even know what the schedules are now. I'm not talking about producing things on their own. Look at the great Paul Erdős, famous mathematician. He never sullied himself with employment. He had almost zero possessions. He literally, look him up. He literally traveled around the world and stayed in friends' houses. He owned almost nothing. His labor was unshackled, and it was conducted on his own terms. He used to drink a lot of coffee, too. I don't drink so much coffee. I only drink 2 cups of coffee a day. But I also like to have my wine uh, at lunch and dinner. I keep it old school, sometimes ale. But if even modern mathematicians like Erdős can redefine work, surely we may aspire to emulate in some way. You can look at the if that's not enough for you, you can look at the life of the great genius Alexander Grodente, one of the greatest geniuses of our times. And in the early 1970s, he walked away from academia at the peak of his fame. Why? Because of its entanglements with the military industrial complex and what he saw as a betrayal of higher human values. By the way, as a side note, some fool in the comments section recently said to me, it was hilarious to read. He said, "I'll bet you have never served in the military." And I answered, why would I? Why would I? Neither would the founding fathers of America, by the way, because the concept of an army, the concept of a standing army, is unconstitutional. Did you all know that? This whole modern idea that we have of the nation state, that's alien to the founding fathers. In fact, in America, those of you who are interested in American history and you respect our true history, not the fake history you were taught in public schools, you were actually a citizen of the state where you were born in. There was no such thing as a US passport. We were a union of states. But of course, everything changed after the Civil War. But that's a fact. The founding fathers saw each state as almost an independent entity in some ways. You did have people who were more federalists than others. For example, Alexander Hamilton was very much the early version of what today would be called a federalist. He was called a tyrant, by the way, by the likes of Thomas Jefferson, who believed in states' rights. But anyway, I'm not going to get into that in this video. But the whole purpose of this is to show you that there are alternatives. But anyway, in later years, Grodente, he lived in radical seclusion. He eventually retreated to a small village in the French Pyrenees. He lived without electricity, as far as I'm aware, or modern comforts. He refused to engage with most people, although he remained intellectually active. But he used to warn people. He used to say, "It's for your own good that I'm ignoring you." People used to knock on his door, and he would ignore them. It's a smart man. I would ignore most people if they knocked on my door. Most people are worthy of being ignored. They don't offer you anything of spiritual value. And they won't hear. They don't care about you sharing something spiritual with them. And a lot of people, when you share the gospel with them, for example, they won't have it. And what about Carl Friedrich Gauss, famous mathematician? He used to say that. Remember his famous quote: "It is not knowledge, but the act of learning." He didn't care about the possession itself, but the act of getting there. He said that is what granted the greatest enjoyment. He said that when he clarified or exhausted something, a subject, that he basically moved on to something else. And I love the part of his quote where he says, "In order to go into darkness again." And Euler was you have Euler, he was a tutor. And he held some professorships as well. He held professorships, but again, it's not the same thing as a W-2 employee in 2025. That is what I am getting at. So the goal is not necessarily to avoid labor, and if that's what you understood from my previous video, that's not what I said. What I said was that you have to labor rightly, freely, and on terms that uphold human dignity. Do some of you not know or are not taught anymore what self-respect means or dignity anymore? Do they not teach that anymore? You do not need, point number 2, by the way, you do not need a full-time income. What you really need is full-time wisdom. One of the most grievous errors of the age is to conflate employment with sufficiency. You are told that if you are not employed for 40 hours or more a week, that you're going to necessarily descend into ruin. I've had people say that in the comment section. People said, this is one step away from homelessness. But if you observe closely, my idea was not born of, it's a historical fact, what I am telling you. But this whole concept, the modern concept of work, is not born from God. Certainly, it's not biblical in any way. It's also not what gentlemen did up until the 19th century. It was really born out of industrial necessity. You see, the factories in the industrial up north in the US and in parts of England and industrialized Europe, the factories demanded full-time compliance. And so the culture started to reshape itself to comply. We live in a culture of compliance. But the body, the human body, you do not need 40 hours of toil for someone else to survive. Nor does the spirit require such a burden. And if you truly believe that's something that is required, then you have not read the Bible. You have no understanding of the Christian faith, because that's not what God says work is about. A man who lives with discipline and thrift, you can often cover your needs with, even 10 to 15 hours of intelligent work a week. Because it's not about laboring more, but in needing less. Let me say that again. It's not because you need to work more hours and get more money. It's because your needs are too much, too many. You know, the vast majority of you, I want you to honestly ask yourselves this question. If you are living by yourself in an apartment, in an overpriced apartment that you cannot afford, do you really need that apartment? Ask yourself that question. Do you really need to live alone? In other words, if I'm just going to give a numerical example, if you are paying, let's say you were paying $2,000 a month in some overpriced, disgusting city, big city, degenerate, and you are paying, let's say, 2,000, and it's a one bedroom. I don't know how many whatever bedrooms you have. You're all by yourself, but yet you can share an apartment. Let's say renting a room like the Victorian gentlemen used to do. They didn't live alone. That was unheard of for a single man, and especially young single men, unless you had inherited property or you had property where you didn't have the monthly something like a mortgage or monthly rent. Most people in the 19th century, ladies and gentlemen alike, lived in what they called what they would call today bed and breakfast hostels. And yet, some of you I have heard in many times said, "Oh, I can't afford to live alone." Why would you want that? You see, this is a sign of how broken our society is. If your aspiration is to live all alone, what does that say about you? Especially in an apartment that you cannot afford. You can just as easily rent a room somewhere and you'll save a lot of money. And then you wouldn't have to work the number of hours, assuming you live alone and you have to work a lot to cover those expenses. So, a man who is, if you're a man or a woman too, if you are disciplined, you can make it work. You need to just simply need less. The vast majority of things you have are things you do not need. They are things that you have been told by others that you must have. That is a fact. Look around what you have, your possessions, and think about if you truly need them. The third point that I have is not everyone can do this, but if you can teach. It's really a noble trade. It's what Euler did, for example. You can take stock of what you know. If you can speak clearly, if you can write well, if you can play an instrument, or you could teach a foreign tongue, you're already in possession of some marketable skills. You know, the internet, for all its vulgarities, it does possess a huge advantage, a merit. It connects you to across oceans to people who might want your services. You may begin by maybe offering lessons online, or it could be I do mathematics, for example. Some of you might do English or Latin or ancient Greek, if you know it. Some of you are programmers. Um, you will find with patience that even a handful of students um, can allow you to survive. You can do things. Um, and I know I've heard people say things like, well, AI is going to take over. Oh, please. Shut your mouth. Shut your mouth. You need to stop reading the news so much and start actually living. It's not demeaning to have less. It's dignified. You are cultivating, by the way, when you teach the mind of another human being. No AI can do that. And if you seriously believe that AI has any consciousness, you're ignorant. What if not online? What if you don't want to do it online? Well, you can consider local schooling co-ops. There are a lot of homeschool families around the country. You have church groups. You need to build your own social circle. There's a lot of options when it comes to that. And they are honorable options. You can also produce something real and you can sell it. Production. Not code, not data, but of things. You know, the modern man, for all his self-described cleverness, you no longer know how to make anything. But that's your opportunity, you see. Can you bake a proper loaf of bread? The majority of you, be honest, if you are between the ages of 20 and 30, you have no idea how to bake bread. I'm willing to affirm that almost universally. You probably, if you eat bread, you probably buy it at a shop somewhere. You don't know how to make bread. You don't know how to do much of anything on your own. Can you make soap? By the way, from lard, I don't make soap because I don't have to, because I actually buy. There is a soap that is called Grandma's Lye soap and lard soap, and you can get it at some. I don't know in your area, but you can get it in many discount stores, and it lasts for months. What can you personally do? You may produce, if you know how to do it, some goods for sale. You can start with, if you have neighbors. Sometimes I know people who sell bread, homemade bread. They do preserves. You're not going to become rich, but you will become free, and that is the greater treasure in all this. But we need to be more specific as well. And there really are other corners, especially in the old world in Europe, that you can still find men and women who they make a modest but noble living through they sell bread, handmade goods. No, they're not the majority, but they exist. And many of them decided that they wanted to stay quietly in their villages, in their towns. And you could find them. They're usually present at their markets. And they prove that such a life is still possible for those who will it. But I think that the main infection some of you have is, again, misplaced expectations, mostly of a material nature rather than a spiritual one. That is why you've decided to be in the grind rather than free. You may also earn money, some of you, and many people do it in the stock market. Right? If you do have some savings, you can always invest money. That's another way you can learn. If you own property, some of you, and depending on what your state laws are, you can have renters, and you could live off the rent. Because there's always going to be people who are slaves to their desires, and there's always going to be people who would rather be in the grind because they can't be on their own, and so that's an advantage for free men like us. Um, of course, I always recommend make sure you check the laws in your state, because if I lived in a place like New York, for example, I would not rent an entire property to tenants because it's very hard to evict them. We have no In America today. We no longer have actual private property. It's been taken away from us for the most part, with under different excuses. So you can also share your home with a like-minded friend if you have one. You can sublet a room. By the way, here's a secret. None of you knew about this, but I'm going to share it with you all because it's not. There's nothing wrong with it. Actually, I'm actually quite happy to tell you. I never paid rent in New York ever. Let me repeat that. I never paid rent in New York City when I lived there. But how? How do you get away with that? Well, very simple. Very, very simple. You rent an apartment and you sublet the other rooms, and the other tenants will happily pay for it. I did have an incident though where one of the tenants decided not to pay, and I had to take him to court, of course. And that's when I realized that in New York, the laws are not made in favor of any kind. Even if you are, I was not specifically the landlord in that case. I was simply another tenant at the time, but I've never paid rent. I did have to take him to court though, and it was the lawyers do nothing for you, by the way. My lawyer was a disaster, by the way, and I was very close to naming the lawyer, but I won't because it's there might be some legal consequences for that. But he was the worst one of the worst lawyers I've ever seen. Only in it for the money. He was a Jewish lawyer and very uninterested. Just to let you know. He even charged me for the last call where I actually called him to thank him because the case was over. Uh, he actually charged me for that call, so you can imagine just how disgusting of a person. But anyway, uh, but I got away with not paying rent, is what I'm trying to say. I've never had a 9 to 5 job ever in my life. It just hasn't happened. Uh, and in the past, the entire world ran on bartering, by the way, and exchanges between friends and family. It is not slothful, it's wise. I've seen people reduce their living expenses to $300 a month by bartering services. Growing a garden, if you have one, not everyone has one, but you can rent out a shed. Uh, in some places, you may laugh, but if you earn little and you spend less, you sleep more peacefully than the salaried slave who dines on debt. You also have buy nothing groups. You have on Facebook, for example. You have Craigslist barter sections. I know not every city has them though. It all depends on where you go. But some of them will fix your bike in exchange for a toolbox, or they'll repair. They might do a repair for in exchange for a deep freezer. When I lived in New York and I was paying no rent, my monthly expenditures, and this was not long ago, by the way, this was around 2018. My monthly expenditures were about 400, $500 per month, and I lived well. I'm not a bum. I'm not on the street. Uh, you can also, if you do have the land, some people rent part of their land to for car parking, for parking cars, or you can also do. Some of you, I know, you do firearms training. That's amazing. I love that. That's a great job. Firearms training. That's not a 9 to 5 job. You also have. So I've mentioned several things by now that should pique your interest. So there's no excuse. If you're the type of person you keep saying no, I have to be in the grind. No, you don't. You also have fellowships. You have churches. You have Christian fellowships. The Amish already do this, but the Mennonites as well. You have home church circles. So they also do informal bartering. The Mormons, I think, also do that as well. Uh, you can also accept. I'm not saying to never accept work, but you can accept work on occasion, but on your terms. So you may, on occasion, accept work, but choose it with care. You have to avoid the contract of the wage slave. For example, when I was in New York, a lot of people up there who were interested in in pure mathematics, actually, some of the Chinese people there, the parents, they hired me to do certain things for their families. But I was I wanted it as a 1099 employee, that's not a wage slave. And you look instead for things that you like to do. We should all become 1099s, actually, and they should get rid of the most of the social security scam that we have in America. But by the way, our generation, we don't have social security. We're done. Once the previous generation dies off, the boomers, we're on our own. So you better keep that in mind. uh, and most of humanity was on its own for centuries. By the way, social security is a relatively modern phenomenon. It's only been because of the post-war. It started around the 1930s under FDR. In the case of the U.S., copying the European model, the Prussian model, but it's government control, and it's bankrupt anyway. I've met people who they work once a week and they haul furniture, and they spend the rest of their time gardening, teaching, studying, praying. They're not rich, but they're never sickly. They're never hurried. So now we come to the complementary side. If you are to earn less, that means you have to spend less. But this is not deprivation, it is liberation. You make your own bread, cook your own meals, don't dine out. Why on earth would you want to go to a restaurant these days? It's disgusting. And plus, you have to tip the waiters. By the way, tipping is a new thing in America for the past 50, 60 years. If you look at American history, real Americans hated tipping. Mark Twain blasted tipping as a European import, and it really is, unfortunately. It's one of those unfortunate imports. The original the earlier American stock was against tipping. It was unheard of. You need to read a little bit more history to understand the country you live in and why we are in the position that we are in today. Don't buy gadgets you don't need. Wear clothes until they beg to be mended, and then you mend them. Make sure you buy fabrics that are linen, cotton. Don't buy this polyester rubbish. Wool, avoid chemicals. Use lard soap. You wash only what needs washing, of course. Air your linens. That's not filth, it's wisdom. Cleanliness, yes. Everything should always be clean, including you, by the way. But I'm talking about chemical sterility. Reject the culture that says you have to smell like a synthetic field of lilies and bleach to be considered clean. That's not hygiene, by the way. That's advertising. Literally. But yes, but keep your bodies clean, of course. Right? You could do that if you don't have plumbing. You could do that with a washstand. I've used a washstand before. It takes a little bit of skill, but it's not difficult. It's just you have to know what you're doing. Um, you need to cultivate a life of order, slowness, and prayer. We have to come to the heart of it. Why all of this? Why reject the job? Why this path of quiet labor and modest income? Why? You see, your soul, if you are a Christian, but also a human being generally, was not made for efficiency. The human spirit thrives on rhythm, not rush. You were meant to pray, to reflect, to observe, and walk, not to click and beep and check messages every 30 seconds. If you rise early and you tend to your affairs and you work with your hands, if you can, pray, read with your eyes, right? Um, but also use your eyes to observe the world around you. You are wealthier in spirit than the person who earns six figures and yet knows not how to be still. Is that the kind of life you want? And as I said earlier, you do not need a job, you need a life that you craft under God, a life that will cost less but pays you more where it matters. It's a life that is worth living. And if you have any other suggestions for people who want to make money, you can always leave it in the comments section because all ideas are good ideas when it comes to this. So thank you all. If this was useful for you, please subscribe. I am very grateful to you all, and let's keep this channel growing because we really are changing mentalities. Thank you all, and may you have a happy 4th of July weekend. May you be safe, however, and don't do anything that I wouldn't do.